I'm Matt Rohal, and today I'm talking with Liz Florentino about her new book, Angels, Bullies, and Brick Walls. Hello, Liz.
Hello, Matt.
Congratulations on the book. It's a great read.
Thank you. I'm glad you think so.
And I'm sorry that you had to endure all that you did to accumulate the material that makes up the book. It sounds as if your life was quite an ordeal for quite a long time.
A very long time. Yeah.
So much of what I've read and heard about the book focuses on the serious side of it, and rightly so, as medical malpractice, as you note in the book, is a tragedy that is far more common than people realize until it happens to them or to somebody they know. Um, and as I gather from reading your book, the judicial system is rigged against the survivors of medical malpractice. It is full of hurdles that are essentially impossible to overcome. And so I'm glad that you're bringing these issues to light. But what really struck me about the book is just how engaging and even entertaining the story is, and how inspiring your story is, which is pretty amazing, given what I was just saying about the basis of the book. But I'd like to focus on those engaging and inspiring parts, because that's, to me, is what makes your book so relatable and what elicits compassion for you, and what has kept me turning the pages to find out what happens next. So let's start at the beginning. As you note in your introduction, medical malpractice is, something that people think only happens to other people. But your original injury that you suffered is also something that can happen to anybody at any time. You simply stumbled and fell. So can you just set the stage for us? Like, how did all this begin?
I was had a small home bakery, and I had baked a batch of cookies that I was supposed to deliver to a store. And there were some acquaintances who were working across the street. And so I thought, well, I'm going to take them a couple of cookies, be the nice neighborly person. And so I was walking across the street, and I had these cookies in my hand, and I said, hello. And when I did that, I stepped in a really shallow pothole and did a 180, and stopped myself with my arm, which didn't rotate with me. So I don't want to get graphic, but I broke my elbow, and I entered that world of medical malpractice nightmare on that day. Well, that's not when the doctor hurt me, but that's the very beginning of the journey that, you know, has led me to this moment 4 years later. Yeah.
Yeah, and as you detail in the book, I mean, when that day you went to the emergency room and had your elbow set, and that part went fine,
Mhm.
right? It wasn't until you had a follow-up consultation and appointment to begin the process of rehabilitating your elbow.
So the plan was that I would have go to occupational therapist twice a week for 3 months. And at the end of each month, I would go for a follow-up with the surgeon. And so it was during that first follow-up, and I won't get graphic here with that. And but he, without my consent, without any explanation, without any warning, um, performed a made up maneuvers on me that it, the result of it was head to toe injuries. And he did it in a really abusive way, because I cried out for him to stop. He was hurting me. Didn't stop.
What did they tell you after you reported the injury?
There was going to be a meeting about it. And yet, a solid week later, nobody bothered to call me back to tell me what was going on. I was just left to assume that it was taken care of, I guess. So then I started calling, like, what happened? Well, we can't tell you what happened. And then I started making calls throughout
It
the
just doesn't
entire.
concern you.
Yeah, so let me first say that, so now and then I think we're going to crack up about some of these things that we're going to talk about. First of all, as you said, like, there is nothing funny about malpractice, nothing funny about being injured, nothing funny about our justice system shutting us out after being hurt. But I think what's funny, it's not funny like haha, it's funny, ridiculous funny. Like that is so ridiculous and indecent that some of these things that did not make me laugh before, I'm able to see in a different light, as in, it's so ridiculous it makes you laugh. I love that I've gotten to that point, because before it was, this is so ridiculous that I don't know how I'm going to survive it. So I still carry bits of that trauma with me, but I'm not, I think it's kind of stuck in my body. So now and then I kind of tear up, but overall, I think that I'm just really proud of myself for being able to laugh at some of these things now. So I called and explained myself, I don't know how many times, but I broke it down in the book, numerous phone calls to report what happened. I really truly thought, I just don't know what I'm doing. I just don't know who to talk to. Even though I kept getting sent back to one person throughout this entire hospital corporation that owns some 16 hospitals, they have offices everywhere. There's one man that I kept getting redirected to, and that was the risk management director. So it was unbelievable. And it took me months to figure out that the hospital wasn't going to help me. And by the time I figured that out, I thought, well, I just might have to try to get a lawyer, really hurt and they're not helping me. I might have to get a lawyer. So at that time, when I found out that the hospital wouldn't help me, I found out that I had no rights to, my rights had been watered down so much that I couldn't get a lawyer. And so let me fast forward just a little bit in the story. Once I found out that there was no one, that I was on my own, totally on my own, and I was disabled at that point. I was disabled, I couldn't work, I was really hurt. So once I found out that there was no help, I lost it. And so it was like, I'm not going to survive this, because the injustice of it, on top of the pain, on top of the worries, on top of the financial woes, was too much to bear, and I wasn't equipped to deal with it. And so the rest of the journey is me trying to figure out, how am I going to survive? And that's when maybe some of the more colorful things start to appear in the story.
Yeah, you reached a point where you just wanted recognition of what had happened, and if possible, ideally, of course, an apology. And to try, in an attempt to try and get some of that recognition, you engaged in various forms of protest.
Truly, what I was trying to do was survive it. I didn't know how I was going to survive the injustice of it. I thought I was dying. I didn't have any energy left in me, that like my life force just drained out of me. I felt it leave me. And so I was desperate to find a way, and I was clueless about how that was going to happen. So my mind was constantly working on, what do I do? What do I do? And I can't let this injustice just go, and I can't just go crawl under the porch and die with this injustice. I look back, and I was embarrassed of myself, because I was so desperate. I was embarrassed of who I became when I was embittered by all that had happened, and I didn't know how to let go of that bitterness. And so everything that I did, I was just so like embarrassed. So now when I look back, I'm kind of in awe of the will to live, of the things that I endured, and the creative ways that I came up with to try to be seen and heard, even though all I wanted to do was crawl under that porch and die. But yeah, so I'm kind of proud of that person that did all of those things now. Yeah.
Yeah, and you should be proud because the personal transformation that you underwent to overcome those feelings of anguish and helplessness, really to me is the strength of the book. It's what makes the book so inspiring. And so I definitely want to get into those inspirational aspects of the book, which we will get to. But let's get to the title, Angels, Bullies, and Brick Walls, because that also, I think, will helps to tell the story of this process that you went through. How did you arrive at that title, Angels, Bullies, and Brick Walls?
So I had a number of titles that I went through, and this one just, when it came to me, just landed, boom, and I knew that was it. So that was a very exciting moment. I was pretty much done writing the book before it came to me, and I keep looking over here because I have it right here. I don't know if it'll be backwards, probably, but this is the cover,
Oh,
and
good. It's a beautiful book.
so the angels I'll get to last. I'll save the best for last. So angels, bullies, brick walls. Brick walls, as you can imagine, were the brick wall systems that I was up against that refused to help, um, including the surgeon, the unaccountable hospital corporation that said that he was working within his scope of work and didn't read my complaint. Then there was the justice system that was not there for me and is not there for most malpractice victims. And also things like the Social Security office that said I could work when I was disabled. The, you know, the medical board that did nothing to, they decided that in their so-called investigation that was so private and, probably didn't even exist because they can't tell you what they're doing. I don't even believe that there was one when they decided that the doctor did nothing wrong, even though they didn't investigate me. They didn't ask me a single question. So all of these brick wall systems, those are the brick walls. And the bullies, the bullies and angels, bullies and brick walls were actual bullies that, I know you don't like it when I curse, but these grown ass people who were who were bullying me when I was protesting. I was injured protesting on the sidewalk by myself, holding a sign out in the wind, and these people were coming out of the woodwork, spitting at my feet, flipping me off, shouting nasty things at me, screaming at me from across the street. And those were the actual bullies that I was up against and had to, there's what I went through in the book is how I had to get the nerve up to keep going back out there. And then the bullies I could also say were bullies in my head that were, the fears, the bitterness, the, the obsessive thoughts about justice. Those were the bullies in my head that were not letting me have any peace outside of all of the actual bullies who were bullying me. So that wasn't helpful. But then we have, thank goodness, the angels. So I thought for probably at least a couple of years, I thought I was really alone in the situation that I was in. And I was most of the time. I felt really alone. And when I was writing the book, I realized, oh my goodness, there were so many people, whether they knew me or not, so many people that made up this sort of web that this protective web of inspiration, of shoulders to stand on, of, you know, my doctors who worked on me continuously for 2 years and 3 years. And, you know, it's like I had the best care anyone could have had. And when I say people who didn't even know me, I'm talking about mentors and um, people that I looked up to and that I was learning from. There were a lot of things working in my favor that I didn't quite piece together as I was going through it. That these lucky things that friends might say, or, you know, I really had so much going for me. And I met people that I had never met before that were inspiring. And I mentioned so many people in the book. So if you read the book, you'll see I was hardly ever without somebody in that net keeping me going in one way or another. And so I saw them when I was writing the book as, you know, stepping stones, helping me to get to where I needed to be. So these are grateful tears. These are tears of appreciation.
And you mentioned that some of these angels were the doctors. I want to emphasize that this book is not a takedown
Mhm.
of the medical profession. There were some people that harmed you, but then there were a lot of people that were in your corner and were supportive of you and really helped you get through this.
Absolutely. So, you know, being an advocate for patient rights does not mean that I am in any way against our medical community, because obviously we need them and I'm grateful for them. It means that when things go wrong, that the injured need help and acknowledgement. And that's what I'm talking about when I say that I'm a patient rights advocate. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
And some of those doctors, even some of the ones that were helpful, they also are living in a world where they are constrained by the judicial system. I'm thinking of one doctor in particular who was on your side and was very helpful. And then one day you mentioned that you were considering hiring a lawyer and you were asking him for a statement. And he, as you put it comically in the story, like, just popped a wheelie on his chair and immediately backtracked. Um, but aside from that, he was very helpful to you and supportive of you.
Yes, this doctor was the first doctor I saw who said he actually just like looked at me and said, I can help you. And hearing that, just because after being injured, and it was a few weeks before I saw him, might have been, yeah, it was at least a few weeks. Um, and I was carrying myself just like so hurt and so scared. So to have him tell me that, like to look at me and say, I can help you, you know, I appreciate that he did that. But when I came back a few weeks later and said, you know, I'm considering suing, can you write me a letter, which wouldn't have done anything now that I know that. But boy, he did. He ended up on the other side of the room, wheeled back and said, you're good to go, basically. You know, you're fine. You're good. See you later.
I'm glad you mentioned. I said that I found a lot of humor in the book, and you rightly mentioned that there is nothing funny about medical malpractice. And when I say there's humor in the book, it clearly, obviously, is not of the silly slapstick sort of humor. There's a sort of poignancy to the humor. Well, for example, when you did go about looking for a lawyer after making a dozen or more phone calls. One of the law offices you called cut you off in the middle of your story and said, "What?"
She said, call us if you lose a limb.
I
Yeah,
had, I
call us if
mean,
you lose a limb. Can you believe that? So, yeah.
in the moment, that must have felt like a gut punch.
Hmm.
But when you read it in the book, that's kind of funny.
It went down just like I put it. And I was taken aback, like, oh. okay, like, but then it made sense after I kept, when I looked back, I thought, wow, she must have to tell so many people, call us if you lose a limb. She saved a lot of time of not having to listen to my entire story and me crying through it because I cried every time I called the law office to try to tell them what happened. Yeah, she just cut to the chase.
Tell me about your writing process and how you turned this ordeal into this story that ultimately, in addition to being a call to arms, is incredibly entertaining, engaging, and inspirational.
First started writing, it was not readable. I'm not a very good writer to begin with, but it was, I've never written a book before. I don't know what I'm doing. So when I started writing, I was still really in that mode of, you know, I'm going to tell this story and I'm, really still kind of riled up from it. And so it was turning out to be just me whining and complaining the whole time about what happened and giving the tiniest little details about it. And I met a woman who is a coach, and she she's really brilliant, and she took a peek at this, and she's a writing coach, she's a creative coach. She's into business and all kinds of things. She's written many books. So she took a peek at it and she was like, it's as if you were trying to prove you didn't make it to court. So I was taking it out on the page is what was happening. And so for the reader to have to read every little awful detail so that I could prove my point was not something that a reader would want to have to read. So when I wrote, I was really trying to have the reader in mind. Like, I want to get my point across, but I also want them to be able to finish the book and not feel worse going into it than, when they arrived at it, to feel better when they exit it, because I felt better when I exited the writing. But when I wrote, I cried on every page. My body relived a lot of the ailments, like, started happening. I started feeling things in my body that were dormant, I guess. The CRPS in my arm started, symptoms started flaring up. I was losing more hair because when I was really hurt, I was losing, shedding. So the writing process was me sitting down with the computer every day and mapping out. I didn't know how to do it. I had to map out, the sequence of events that were happening. And when I started putting it all together, that's when I started making connections that, oh my goodness, like I said on the previously, these angels that I talk about, these stepping stones started to appear, that I started to recognize that this led me to this, to this, to this. And I had a full story. That's a long
It,
version.
it's something that when I'm struggling with something, I will remind myself to kind of step outside myself and almost look at my situation as if it were a Seinfeld episode or something like that. And in some of these situations, I mean, yeah, if you're living it as you did, there's nothing funny about it. But you do a wonderful job as you're telling the story of kind of poking fun at yourself, at how, in a way, naive you were in some cases of, thinking that, oh, of course the hospital is going to want to help me here. Oh, of course some lawyer is going to come in and argue my case for me. And to say you're naive isn't fair, because those of us who go through life thinking that there is some justice in the world would expect those sorts of things. But when you're confronted with the reality of facing off against the system or the giant, um, that's when it really becomes clear that you're just up against something that is bigger than you've really had to think about before.
For sure. And I really was naive. So in the book, I named the hospital corporation the Giant. You referenced the Giant. So if you haven't read this, that's the Giant that I was up against. And so it has its own personality, I think. And I really saw it as that, as this big, dark, fierce brick wall personality that I was, helpless against. And but yeah, I poke some fun at what I was going through because I was just feeling my way, and I knew that what I was doing was probably not I wasn't mentally stable. Let me just say I was like I said, I was really desperate trying to figure out how am I going to survive this emotionally, physically, in all ways. And so the things that I was coming up with, I kept thinking, how am I going to do this?
You're telling the story, the hospital system and also the judicial system really do become a character uh,
Mm,
in the story. But as you mentioned, there's also other characters, good characters, angels as part of your story, who helped you to develop that inner strength that you found to not allow yourself to be beaten down by the giant. And so, can you tell me a little bit about some of these people
mhm.
and some of the tricks that you developed or learned from them that allowed you to find that inner strength that enabled you to get past all of this?
I didn't have any money, but I had some destruction happen within my house due to what a construction worker did, or a construction crew did. And so I received a small payment of compensation for that, and I immediately poured it into this coach. I hired a coach, Tony Robbins coach. It was when I started protesting on the street, and I would get home and feel so icky from all of the bullying and from being out there. And she taught me to come home, take a shower, or at least wash my hands and wash that energy off, to physically wash that energy off. And so I think anyone can do that, coming home from a rough day, come home and wash off that energy and get yourself reset. So that was really helpful. And also she told me that and this is one of Tony's teachings, is that, what you focus on grows. And so she told me that while I was out there protesting, to focus on the good things that I see, nice people, so I started really focusing less on the bullies and more on, um, you know, saying nice prayers for, um, anyone that I encounter, or, seeing things in a different light. So she really helped me a lot, and in a lot of other ways too.
You should give yourself some credit too, because you took, in a few different cases, something that these coaches and doctors were telling you, and in your own mind and heart, turned them. I'm thinking of the coach who said, for her own purposes, I don't do overwhelm. And you turned that while you were protesting into I don't do flinching. Because for
Yeah.
somebody, an ordinary person and an introvert and a good-hearted person who is out taking this confrontational stand, yeah, my instinct, I like you, I think in a lot of ways, would be to be inclined to flinch. And you had to build yourself up and say, I don't do flinching when these cars came by and honked or people flipped you off. And then this doctor was giving you a message that I think really in your own mind became the turning point for you in turning the corner throughout this whole situation when you came up with the phrase and the mantra, love healing more, because up until that point, you had such a strong antipathy towards the giant and the system, and you were letting that bad negative energy bring you down.
Yeah, there was something that my doctor said to me that I think inspired what I heard in the love healing more message. Um, I managed to gain some 20 pounds. I was really uncomfortable in my weight because, well, for one thing, it was not helpful to have ribs out of place and be 20 pounds overweight and still need,
Which, if I can interrupt, is kind of a funny part in the book, because you say you put on all this weight despite the fact that you couldn't open jars or tear open bags of chips or anything because of your injury, but you still managed to.
I did. I had a
Nobody
friend
does.
who kept taking me out for burgers and beer, so I think that's where most of that came from.
Well-meaning friends.
And so I managed to gain 20 pounds, which was amazing, considering I couldn't open anything. Um, and so I told her, I need to lose 20 pounds. I need to lose some weight. And she said, you know how to do that, right? And I said, yeah, I know how to do it. And she said, um, how'd she put it? It was enjoy eating less food more. Enjoy eating less food more. So you might have to think about that for a second, but I loved that phrase. I loved that, and I stuck it on my fridge. I wrote it down and stuck a note on my fridge. Enjoy less more. Um, and not long after that, I like to believe this was divine intervention. Believe what you want. Um, I I enjoy thinking of it as divine intervention. I was I was just barely starting to turn the corner on coming back into myself. And I was at home just walking through my house, and this thought was downloaded into my brain that said, love healing more. And I immediately knew what that meant. Like, I didn't even think about it. Like, I just knew that was it. I knew that was my turning point. I knew that that was going to save me. And I knew that it meant that I don't have to spend the rest of my life trying to figure out how to forgive what happened, trying to love the situation, trying to accept what was done. I didn't have to do any of that. All I had to do was care more about me than hating the systems, hating what was done. I just had to care more about me, even 51% of the time. It doesn't have to mean, that I'm completely over it, but that I can heal if I just start caring more about me. So anyone who's listening to this, put down whatever you're doing and write this down, love healing more, because you can use this anytime. Say you're, I don't know, going through a bad breakup and you're obsessed with what's going on. Maybe something that you're obsessed about that's harmful to you. Come back, consciously take care of you more, and you will start to unravel that grip that has a hold of you. And that's exactly what happened. And I didn't really have to try that hard to make that shift. It's like, as soon as I got that download, I understood it, and the grip started to loosen up. And before I knew it, I was feeling so much better, and I knew had come out of that serious darkness where I thought I was dying. And life started looking much more beautiful to me after that. I could see outside of myself. Before that, I was completely internal, so internal that not even the closest people to me knew my whole story. I didn't talk about it really, and I didn't recognize the birds chirping. I couldn't hear that. I couldn't see color very well. It was like, but I didn't know it. I didn't know that I wasn't feeling the breeze on my skin, or, recognizing beauty in the world, which there is so much of. All you have to do is, go out and put your feet in the grass for a minute. There's so much that I was missing out on. And so after that, you know, it's like the world lit up in techno color for, I don't know. I started to be able to really appreciate all those little things that mean so much to our daily lives, our senses. It's like my senses started to wake up.
Yeah, and I feel like that's my favorite part of the book. And to my reading, just the real strength of the book. I mean, yes, this book is about medical malpractice and it is a call to arms, but this book is also so full of inspiration, and there are just so many, just nuggets of wisdom in this book as you reach this part of the process of your recovering yourself. As you put it at one point in the book, you say you turned your back on yourself when you made searching for justice your number one priority. And so, you know, it, so much of that regaining your inner strength um, came with that downloading of Love Healing More, and that absorbing of your coach's wisdom of what you focus on grows. And one of the things I love about this book is, although it is about medical malpractice, these inspirational parts and this wisdom that you have acquired and are sharing in this book are really applicable to anybody and everybody dealing with as I said, the ups and downs of life.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that, because um yeah, there are things that happened that were good that came out of this experience. Would I want to relive that? No.
No.
No, I would just like to have had, these nuggets of positive truths have been delivered to me on a silver platter, but they weren't. So, and it is one of the reasons that I wrote the book, because I do want people, like I said, to feel better coming out of it than going into it. And yeah, and these are things that you can draw on all your life. And I have leaned on a lot of those experiences, because, you know, my story doesn't end with the end of the book. So yeah, I'm glad that this story can have a little inspiration, and hopefully, more people will draw some inspiration from it.